that. Got Curtis. We'll get, let's see, Kevin. Maureen.
Hello.
Hello.
Curtis is here.
And
Scott.
Hello.
And Dan.
Right.
Where Dan?
Dan Burke.
Oh, Dan.
All right.
There he is. Yeah. All right.
Hello.
Hello.
With my Colorado Center for the Blind Bell of Freedom, and it is 5 o'clock, and it is time for another Mountain Time at 5. Yes, the one, the only Mountain Time at 5, produced by all of us in the National Federation of the Blind of Colorado and beyond. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us. We have a outstanding Zoom call for everybody today, and I'll let Jessica and Maureen introduce it, but there are a couple of quick things I have. One, you're not doing anything this weekend. Register for the National Convention. We're really making a big, huge mondo push to get folks to register. It's free. It's going to be a real National Convention done virtually, and you're going to love it, and we're going to construct it together. If you have ideas, please share them with Office of the President at nfb.org. Also, the presidential release that a lot of us heard a week ago is up. You can hear the presidential release. I know a lot of folks have, I don't know what all the clicky clacket clucking is, but we'll have a lot of chapter meetings around the country and around the state this weekend. You might want to listen to the presidential release before you do the chapter meeting. Also, one of our great guys, I talked about it last night, but I want to remind folks, AT guys, I mean, they might as well, you know, he might well be a member of the National Federation of the Blind of Colorado, like a honorary member, because he's done so much for us. So check out atguys.com and check out the Blind Bargains podcast. I think that's all I'm promoting at this particular point. Jessica Beecham.
Hey there. So we are going to have a lot of great calls coming up next week. I think we're going to have another guest appearance from the Blind History Lady. We're going to have another awesome My Blindness Monday. We're going to do some good workouts, and it's just going to be another great week. So the announcement will go out this weekend, and tune in with us at 5 o'clock. And also, I just want to take a second to recognize Kevin Darcy, who Kevin Kovacs told me is on the call, and we are proud to finally be able to announce that he is our very own NFB of Colorado National Scholarship winner. So, Kevin, do you want to say everybody?
Yay.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You bet.
Well, we're glad to have you on the call, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I just wanted everybody to be able to wish you a congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
All right.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Maureen.
Awesome. So thank you everyone for joining us again and spending your Friday night with us. A reminder that if you have any questions related to COVID-19, or you want to become a member of the National Federation of the Blind, or there's anything at all that we could help you with, please call 303-778-1130 extension 219. You can also send an email to assistance@nfbco.org, and that's assistance@nfbco.org. Looking forward to tonight's call. We are going to be hearing from Scott and Dan Burke and Curtis Chong about Audible Pedestrian Signals. So I'm going to turn this over to Scott.
Well, thank you, Maureen. And again, thank you for all the wonderful work you and many others have been doing with our COVID-19 pandemic response. And tonight we're going to talk about Audible Pedestrian Signals. This is an issue that has been of great interest to the National Federation of the Blind over the years. The history I was reading suggests that the first Audible Pedestrian Signals came into being in the 1920s. Of course, they were rudimentary at that time. They were, you know, you'd ring a bell or have a buzzer of some type. The Audible Pedestrian Signals have gone through a lot of various evolutions and revolutions over the years. And what I think we'll do for this presentation is we're going to start out with Curtis, because Curtis is going to sort of set the table for us. He's actually got some show and tell for us tonight. And for blind people, that means we got some good audio. Now, we did a practice run of this before and it worked, but watch, it won't work now. But anyway, I'm going to kick it over to Curtis to get us going.
Okay. Yes, so I just want to say that the technology involved, this is my focus, in the audible traffic signals has progressed or not, depending on your point of view, from very loud bells. When I was living in Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis, we told them we didn't want them. This was back in the early 80s, and they said, well, you know, back in the 50s, we used to have those, and they would make alarm sounds, and the blind community came and told us to make them go away, please, because they blocked the sounds of the traffic. So that was the earliest memory that I have of these things, and the technology has evolved or devolved from that to the simple buzzer, to cuckoo clocks and chirping birds, to just simple beeps, all the way to the point where now these things will actually talk to you and serve you coffee. So I'm going to let you hear a little audio presentation. It's 2.5 minutes long that I put together, and hopefully this screen sharing will work. If the technicians will push the button, here we go. Here's an example of an accessible pedestrian signal which uses the sound of a cuckoo clock or a chirping bird to tell you which street is safe to cross. Okay, did that work or not?
I'm hearing it.
Okay, good. I just want to be sure.
I'm not. I don't know why.
We are.
Yeah, I'm not.
You're not hearing it, but Dan's hearing it.
Yeah, I got it. I think Kevin got it.
No, I don't have it.
Oh, you don't?
I don't have it.
Dan a co-host or a host?
Well, yeah, but it's everybody else I want to make sure that.
Yeah.
I know, but I'm wondering if only the co-hosts are hearing it.
Huh.
Yeah, that might be the case, because I'm not hearing it, Chris.
Well, we did
Well,
it.
I'm not a co-host.
Gary says he can hear it.
Okay.
Let's unmute and do it.
Weird.
Here, I'm going to unmute all. Well, I don't know if you want me to do that. Liam hears it. Okay.
Let's try it one more time, Curtis.
Okay, here we go.
Got Dan.
Okay, starting over. Here we go.
Everybody
Here's
hears
an example of an accessible pedestrian signal which
I
uses
don't hear
the
it, but
sound of
that's
a
all right.
cuckoo
I've heard
clock
it before.
or a chirping bird to
It's
tell
more
you
critical
which
that others
street
hear
is
it.
safe to cross. Here's an example of an accessible pedestrian signal, which can be found in many towns in Australia. This accessible pedestrian signal uses a series of slow clicks to indicate that the walk signal is off and fast clicks to indicate that the walk signal is on. Here it is. That said walk, don't run. This accessible pedestrian signal actually talks to you. Wait.
Charles, walk sign is on to cross. Charles, walk sign.
Okay, so these are examples from early to now, I suppose, although you will find examples of the older technologies in different places, either in this country or in other countries around the world. And it's suffice it to say that there are probably other types of signals that are out there that have been developed, and the purpose initially, of course, is to let us know, people who can't see the light, when the signal is on that says it's okay to go ahead and cross the street. Now, as the technology has evolved, they've added other features like the locator tone that you hear, the beep, beep, beep thing. That is supposed to be audible no further away than, say, 10 or 15 feet from the pole, because you don't want everybody in the neighborhood to have to listen to those beeps all day long and all night. And the newer ones basically don't tell you anything about waiting for the signal or when the walk signal is on, unless or until you take some action with the push button that's on the pole. And one of the issues that I have encountered, I guess you might say, is that some signals you are only required to just press the button, and in other cases you are
Full speech.
required to press and hold, which is a task that is not clearly indicated if you have never seen this kind of technology before. So a lot of times what people do is they push the button and it says wait, and that's all it says. And even when the light,
Alert exclaim from Peter
when
Cyrus.
the walk signal comes on, you know, then it doesn't say anything because you haven't pressed and held the button. So that's my talk on the technology part. All I want to say in sort of to cap this off is there's no standard how these things should behave. There's no common design methodology, and there's no one way that seems to have caught on in most places. And to me, the bottom line is also, when you go into a city that you've never visited before, you will not know at all whether there are signals, let alone where these so-called audible signals are installed. So that's my piece of this. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Curtis. And I can address very briefly here why there is no standard. When the Americans with Disabilities Act was adopted in 1990 and the regulations started rolling out from the various governmental entities, the section dealing with public rights of way, that's a technical term for streets and sidewalks and what have you. So the public rights of way were not, that whole section was reserved. And the governmental agency that was in charge of developing that section is the Architectural Transportation Barriers Compliance Board, which I will now refer to as ATBCB, or the Access Board. They formed a committee in 1999 called the Public Rights of Way Access Advisory Committee, PROAC. I was one of two National Federation of the Blind representatives on PROAC, along with Peggy Pinder Elliott, who at that time was our second vice president. And that committee met for 2 years, came up with some recommendations. Those recommendations were issued by the Access Board in 2011 as a proposed official rule. To this date, that has not ever been promulgated and officially adopted as a final rule. Now, in a bit, I'm going to talk about what is in that rule, and if it is ever adopted as regulation, then we will have a standard. And I'll tell you about what the standard would be. But Dan, why don't I kick it over to you for your thoughts and where you wanted to go with this?
Okay, thanks, Scott. So one of the things that I was curious about was the cost of these things. I mean, we obviously know that, or Curtis has discussed it, some of these have worked better than others for all of us. The earliest cuckoo birds were often too loud. And actually, when I was researching some of this, I found out something. I never knew, listening to the cuckoo going one way and the chirp going the other way, that there was a rule that one of those was the cuckoo was always the north-south street or east-west, I don't know which, but the chirping one was the opposite one. I obviously didn't have adequate training as a blind person to know how to read those things. But some of those, of course, was too loud. I mean, it's not, as Curtis referred to, they obscure the sound of traffic, etc. But there's also the issue of the cost. When 20 years ago, when the discussions were first happening about PROACT kinds of things, in our chapter in Missoula, Montana, we brought in the city works folks to talk to us about, how these were going to, just talk about accessible pedestrian signals in general. There weren't any in Missoula at the time. One of the things we found out for that community was that only 4 intersections in the city, they had about 120 or 125, only 4 of them were controlled by the city, actually. The city only put in 4 for the whole town. The rest, this is a town of about 60, 70,000, were actually installed and maintained by the State Department of Transportation. In Littleton, where the Colorado Center for the Blind is, there are, I don't know how many there are, but there's only one that the state of Colorado manages, and that is actually at way down south on Santa Fe and county line. And I thought there might be a few more because there are big state highways. Like Santa Fe is actually US highway, US 85, and it's huge. And Bellevue is another street that has none of those are all managed by Littleton. So this is good news. Littleton has only one light installed, or audio accessible pedestrian signal installed. That's just about a half a block south of where Julie and I live, and it was by the request of a deaf blind person that lives, or maybe they still live in that area. So that, yeah, and he uses that intersection at Ridge and Broadway, which is a T intersection. And part of the reason they don't have a whole lot more right now is because the center is in Littleton. We've talked about the fact that we want to teach people how to use intersections and hear the traffic sounds, because the city actually is very accommodating. They wanted to come and have us, do you want us to put in audible pedestrian signals for your blind students? And our answer was, no, we don't. We want to learn how to use intersections that don't have those. The cost of these devices now are, well, so we've heard a lot of different things, but I did actually get some information from a distributor for the Polara company. We heard part of their thing on Curtis's thing there, and they're about $675 per button. That's just the device. And there are 2 buttons on a pole, so that makes, an intersection, a normal intersection with traffic going to, 4 corners. So you got about $5,400 just for the devices. That's 8 buttons, that's right. Compared to $100 for a button that doesn't have an accessible pedestrian signal, configured with it. So about $800 for, for an intersection that wouldn't have an accessible signal. So it's a significant amount of money, but not a huge amount. When you compare it to a light might actually cost the city about $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 just to put up a light on any intersection. So I'll pause there, Scott, because I have some other things I can share, but it kind of actually are contingent on a little bit on what the access board standards would say if they were actually activate or actually
Okay.
Force. So
Well, I want to back up just maybe okay, I can tell you what the access board standards would be if they are ever adopted in the current form. The access board calls upon every lighted signalized intersection in the country to have audible pedestrian signals. And if this is ever implemented, the standard that would be used to implement these is the new construction standard of the ADA, which means that every new traffic light control system that is installed would have to have these APSs. And any time that they redo an intersection, put in a new one, replace an old one with a new one, then these signals would have to go in. In the 2011 rulemaking, the Access Board estimated that each year, over almost, well, a little over 13,000 light systems are replaced or are new each year. So the Access Board at that time was estimating the cost of doing each intersection at $3,600. And consequently, if you do the math on what they were estimating, it would be a little over $47 million a year would need to be spent by whoever, the city or the state or whoever owned the road. That's what it would cost. And then ultimately, all the systems would be replaced. At that time in 2011, the Access Board said there were over 300,000 signalized intersections in the United States, and that number grew by about 2,500 a year. If you do the math on all that, we'd be a little bit over 320,000 intersections that are lighted, you know, that are signalized now. So anyway, you can do the math, you know, 320,000 times, whether it's 3,600 or 5,400, that's a lot of money. So Dan, back to you.
Well, thanks, Scott. So actually, Colorado has a protocol. You can actually, there's a form you can fill out, and you, with the Colorado Department of Transportation and or CDOT, as we less than affectionately call it, I guess. And you can fill out a form and request that there be an accessible pedestrian signal installed someplace. But part of that actually also says it reflects exactly what the Access Board standards would be if they were enacted, which is to say that new construction needs to have an accessible pedestrian signal installed. And if you're going to replace, you know, an old one, like, and sometimes you do, you replace old lighted, you put in all new facilities, rewire everything, and then you have to put those in as well. But above and beyond that, you know, you fill out this form for an existing intersection that's not going to, you know, not set to be, you know, replaced or whatever. And if you're blind and you use that intersection on a regular basis, this is what the protocol says, then it's automatically going to recommend that one be put in, and it will work with whatever local entity is responsible for that intersection. And you can request for other intersections that don't have any light at all, but they will have to study those and do some sort of engineering review before they make that happen.
But
So,
the current standard, wouldn't it be, gentlemen, that there is no requirement right now that they be installed at new intersections, and that whatever ones get installed have usually been instigated by somebody making a request either to state or local governments, and then it's sort of a hodgepodge as to where they're going to be installed and under what criteria what would govern the installation? Isn't that the way it is right now?
technically, right now, there's a couple of things. Right now, the standard actually comes out of the T21 legislation, which was passed in the late 90s, the Transit Equity for the 21st Century Act, which says that they should be installed, must be installed where appropriate. That gives no guidance, though, as to what that really means. Now, the other document that is sort of controlling in terms of how these APSs are installed is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which sets up criteria about when they should be installed. And if I can find it, I'll read it. But it's fairly vague. It says upon request, or if the intersection is particularly difficult and has challenges. So the real answer, Curtis, is you're right. In one sense, there really is no standard now. If the rule ever gets adopted, there would be a standard, and it's what I was talking about before. And actually, the MUTCD has specific standards about what these signals should do. They should have the beeping, the beeping control, and the beeping locator, yes. and there are some other standards. Now, going back to expense, I just want to point out that if these are installed at the rate that the Access Board says they should be, it would take almost 25 years to do all of the intersections in the United States, and the total cost over 25 years would be about $1.152 billion. So those are the facts.
One other thing about the cost, Scott, that's the cost of the devices, not installation. Like, for example, Littleton says they have their own crews install them so they don't have an outside contractor, but that may not be the case in every community.
Right, and when I use that figure, Dan, I was using the Access Board's lower figure. So, and over time, obviously that number increases. But I think it's fair to say that if you really put an APS at every single signalized intersection in the United States, it would be billions of dollars over time. We've been talking about a lot about what these are and what it would cost and what they do, but we haven't talked about what the National Federation of the Blind's position is on APSs, and I think that's where we should take this conversation next. And gentlemen, I can start off with sort of some of the history there, or one of you can.
I started out in the 80s on this issue, and I recall a time when, as chapter president in Minneapolis, I engaged in a letter writing campaign to the city council at that time on behalf of our local chapter, saying that under no circumstances should these devices ever be installed. And remember, this was back in the 80s when we didn't have the concept of talking. The only examples that we had been exposed to were the buzzer, the bird, and the clock. You know, basically those were the two ideas. And so our members said, no, we didn't want them at all. And also remember that at that time, traffic patterns, intersections, and the design of streets was probably a lot different than they are today. So that's where we started.
Yeah. Right. Now, Mr. Chung, let's see. So, in fact, in 1982, the National Federation of the Blind in convention assembled passed Resolution 82-19, which called for the absolute, just what you were saying before, that these should not be installed anywhere. In fact, the resolution in old Federation style and sometimes in new Federation style condemned and deplored.
So that was an NWIH resolution.
Yeah, condemned and deplored the installation of traffic signals and called upon Federation leaders to actively inform local municipalities that installing these devices would be doing a great disservice to the blind. But what's funny about that resolution, Curtis, is it doesn't say audible traffic signals or audible pedestrian signals. The language it uses is that we opposed buzzers and clickers at intersections. So you can make the argument, well, if it did something else, then maybe we weren't opposed to it.
Oh, the birds and the clocks, right? Yeah, they don't.
In the 90s, 1992 to be specific, and I believe Resolution 9206, at that time made it clear once again that we are opposed to all variety of these audible traffic signals, audible pedestrian signals. Now, let's move forward to the time of when I was on PROAC. At that time, our position became a little bit more nuanced. And we said at that time, we didn't believe that we needed to install them everywhere, but there are situations where they are necessary, and that traffic engineers and city officials and whoever needed to consult with the blind of the local community to see what kind of signal should be installed. And what we recommended in that particular resolution was that the signal should be vibrotactile only. In other words, you would feel the button or something on the pole that would tell you the direction you needed to cross and when to go. And it would just vibrate instead of making all this noise that some have argued over the years, many of us have argued, the noise that these traffic signals create can, in fact, interfere with your ability to listen to parallel or perpendicular traffic. And then that position was essentially reaffirmed in 2002 when we passed resolutions reacting to the publishing of the Access Board standard, or the proposed standard, that they be installed everywhere. So I don't believe we've passed any other resolutions on this topic since 2002. And so therefore, current Federation policy would be what I was describing earlier, that we believe that they shouldn't be installed everywhere. And when you do want to install them, you need to consult the blind of that community as to what would be the most effective signal to install.
Don't we also say vibrotactile? I mean,
well, the last resolution that spoke on that did not specifically mandate that, although you could bootstrap in the previous resolution and argue that perhaps that's what we're arguing for, but it's a little vague. And so, you know, we haven't had a resolution in a long time, and I've been thinking to myself, do we need a resolution? Should we figure out what our policy should be in 2020? Because I would argue that even since, you know, the early part of this century, the nature of traffic control has changed even more. Yeah. Cars are, of course, a lot quieter. Intersections become more and more complex in terms of the timing of when they tell pedestrians to go and when pedestrians shouldn't go. You have a proliferation of traffic circles. There's just all kinds of weird stuff out there. So I don't know where Dan and Curtis, you guys want to go next, but we might be getting to the point where we, you know, want to take questions or throw it open to a discussion. But that's where Federation policy is currently.
When you guys are ready for them.
Okay. Well, I want to say one thing real quick, Scott. I'm glad you were able to get off of PROAC, and I hope the withdrawals weren't too severe.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was using PROAC for over 2 years.
I think that I agree that it's time to reassess where we're at with our stance on accessible pedestrian signals. Obviously, there are going to be some out there. I think that traffic is different now than it ever was before. Most cars are more quiet than they used to be, if not completely silent. And on smaller intersections, that can be a factor. At the same time that a lot of cars are quieter, we still have all the other big vehicles like diesels, for example, and delivery trucks and whatnot that are much, much louder, therefore mask other vehicles even more. If you have a diesel idling next to you, it's much harder to determine if other traffic's moving and which way they're moving. So I think there are some solutions out there that are good. I don't like the cuckoo thing. I don't know why. I read an article that the Audubon Society had that the Japanese company that first used it in the 70s, copied the cuckoos, directly. And maybe there are cultural differences. Maybe there are cultural differences between Japan and the U.S., but cuckoo has a different connotation. I always felt that it was a bad sign that a cuckoo was telling me to cross the street.
But let me say that for a year and a half, me and some other blind people in Des Moines, Iowa, got together with the city. This was about the time when they thought PROAC was actually going to be published as regulations, and we were very concerned that the rationale for installing the new devices should not be based on who makes the most noise. Are they pitiable blind people who can claim helplessness, or that they should install them near agencies for the blind? Because that seemed, based on what we were looking at, to be a pattern where if you had a school for the blind, or if you had a training center for the adult blind, or if you had a rehabilitation, something with the word blind on it, the engineers would automatically assume, without even thinking about it, that meant you should be putting one of these devices close to the center. Never mind the fact that the blind people, in order to get there, had to cross lots of other streets that didn't have anything, And so we worked with the city and we developed a point system to score different kinds of intersections. And I think that as a part of our discussion about all of this is that we may want to encourage or sort of, say that as part of our thing that we want some kind of rationality to be used in terms of if you're not going to do them at every intersection, then come up with a set of very specific technical standards that talk about difficulty of crossing non-visually. A four-way intersection where every 30 seconds the signal changes and you have equal volumes of traffic going both ways seems to me a type of intersection where you probably wouldn't want to put it, and you might score that one 0, versus an intersection where maybe there's a dogleg crossing that's at an angle, and maybe you got a roundabout in the middle and something, So there's all this little stuff that we got to think about as we move forward. And my hope is that what we do in the National Federation of the Blind is inject some common sense notions about what blindness is and what it is not, because that's what we've always talked about, so that we can say, well, if you're going to do it, then here are the characteristics, one, that should go into the decision to install, and two, this is how they should behave, right? And we shouldn't just let the technology roll out over us without us having something to say about what should be done. And there are some questions. Countdown timer, do you want to hear that as you're crossing the street? Do you want a homing beacon on the other side so you have something to aim at, yes or no, if you're going to do it? What are the other things that are hurtful? What will harm us, our ability to travel as we use this technology, and what will help? So there's a myriad of questions that have not been forcefully answered yet, which is why we're talking about this.
Right, and I do think someday this PROAC rulemaking will be reactivated. It was put on the shelf. It was delayed during the Obama administration, but then put on the shelf officially once the Trump administration came into power. So, depending on what happens in the election and depending on when we emerge as a nation from the pandemic, I do think we will see this as a real issue again, and we will need to be prepared to tell the Access Board what we want. And so I think it's a good time to be talking about all this.
Yeah,
I'm ready for questions.
we can have questions.
Can we?
All right.
Yeah.
We've got, well, Gary put one in the chat. Here's Gary. Gary Van
Hello, everyone. I think we have to keep in mind one thing before I get my question. Cuckoos are parasites. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests to raise their young. My question, I actually have two questions, actually. One is, many years ago, the city of and county of Denver is going to install a signal at 6th and Logan. I live half a block from it, and I would definitely hear from my windows that annoying sound. And they were going to do it because, and I don't know if this is still true, the Colorado Department of Rehab had an office in the building at 6th and Grant. And they noticed blind people walking by. I was able to stop it. So my question is, does the city and county of Denver or local government have to inform the residents and or property owners?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Divergent diamonds. I think the idea is intriguing. I know there's a divergent diamond in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the pedestrians walk down the center of the street with barriers on either side to keep traffic from smacking into them. I know there's a divergent diamond at McCaslin. I believe it's been explored by the Denver chapter. I'll be the devil's advocate here. Could accessible signals actually be valuable at divergent diamonds since it doesn't follow the normal traffic pattern?
Oh, Gary, what about the 10-second pedestrian lead signal where the walk signal actually comes on before the traffic can move? Remember that?
Like at 6th and Lincoln.
Yeah, and something that was proposed as part of the Colfax thing, you know, where you have no we wait for traffic. This is our traditional technique for crossing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if the walk signal comes on to give pedestrians a head start and there's no traffic, what is our position on something like that? That would, in my opinion,
interesting. Yeah, that is called, what the ATPCB calls it, is a lead pedestrian interval, and they do recommend APSs in such circumstances.
Right, and so I could make an argument that especially if it's a large number of seconds. You know, if it's only 5 seconds, I don't care. But if it's 20, we've just lost 20 seconds in terms of timing. And so one could make the argument, without really using the whole pitiable blind people approach, that we need something to tell us that the 20 seconds have started.
I can see that, because at 6th and Lincoln, they put that there as a safety measure because there was a lot of pedestrians struck there. Plus, you also have sounds, ironically, coming from Spear Boulevard underneath you. So even I have problems crossing that street, and it's even hard for me to sometimes tell if the light is actually correct, because that is a very dangerous intersection at 6th, Lincoln, and Spear.
And let us not forget that to a greater and greater and greater extent, traffic patterns, street design, and all that kind of stuff, they're not being designed to move people. They're being designed to move vehicles, right? This is what city governments are wanting to do. And I think it's much more pronounced, much more than it used to be, where before they do a better job of designing for pedestrians. I think now that's especially if you're out in the suburbs, how many times do you find suburban areas where there are no sidewalks, right? Things like that. So
yes.
I know Streets Blog is pushing for having the traffic speed limits in Denver to be 20 miles an hour. Actually help. I've never commented on it because I thought it was an interesting thing. But there is that move to actually reduce traffic, except in certain areas, to 20 miles an hour.
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
and let's be clear. The safest way to protect pedestrians would be not to ever put them in a position to intersect with traffic at all. And some places do have tunnels at intersections or bridges over some streets. That would be the safest way to do it. But of course, society has made the judgment that no, that would cost too much, so we're going to put pedestrians at risk, whether they be blind or not. We're going to put them at risk at traffic intersections.
We have Mr. James Gashel.
Yeah, hi there. So there are lots of really interesting issues here. I'm glad Scott went through the resolutions, because it shows an evolution in our understanding and expression of our policies and philosophy on this issue. Maybe I wrote some of these resolutions back in the long ago.
I expect you did.
Well, and that takes me to, because my whole thinking on this has evolved along the lines of the resolutions, actually. But I wanted to say that the fact that the legal authority for audible traffic signals was enacted back in the 1990s, and we're 30 years later and nothing has happened, except that the public rights of way regulations were drafted but then have been dormant, speaks more to our ambivalence than it does to the, it's in part the fault of the government, quite obviously, but think about it. We had the Pedestrian Safety Enhancement Act, which wasn't enacted until, 2010 or 11. And we started talking about that maybe about 4 or 5 years before that. We got it through the Congress. And then 2011, it's enacted. And a couple of years ago, it actually got regulations and took effect. In other words, the time in a arguably somewhat similar issue has been cut dramatically because we had a specific position and goal that we wanted. And I still have a sense that on audible traffic signals, we are not quite there yet. We have a bit more ambivalence. That speaks to what we should do. Because my thought is the NFB should have, similar to what we did on the pedestrian safety legislation and ultimately regulations. We had a task force or a committee on this that really worked it and pushed all of us toward a specific goal. And we need that with audible traffic signals. This discussion helps to take us in that direction. And the final thing I wanted to say is, it hasn't been mentioned, but one of my concerns about these things has been, will the city or the traffic department maintain these things to the same degree that they maintain visual traffic signals? And the proof is that I know of at least one case where they didn't, and that was in Greeley.
Yes, sir.
And we had some blind people, a couple of blind people hit and severely injured in that case. And Greeley actually argued that the Colorado law didn't require them to do it. That the Colorado law didn't cover audible traffic signals, just visual traffic signals. And I testified in the court on that for the blind people and said, come on now, a traffic signal is a traffic signal. And if you have an audible signal giving you false information, the traffic department has put the blind person at risk because the presence of the audible traffic signal almost inevitably means you are going to rely on it. Just like you rely on the red light and the green light, you assume that the audible traffic signal is functioning. So if we're going to have audible traffic signals, and I think there are plenty of cases where we should, we need to be sure that they maintain the same level of functionality and accuracy. In other words, they're coordinated with the visual signals. It seems obvious to say that, but it's not obvious to the traffic departments. And so I think we got to do that. But I'm all for a task force of some kind on this.
I agree with you, Jim, and I of course recall that case because I got involved in it several years ago now, and it really was a tragic situation because both of these people at the time were students of our center, and they were up in Greeley on a break or something, or maybe one of them was a student at Greeley by that time. And they were crossing a street where it was a T intersection, lots of traffic one way, not much coming the other, and they were getting the signal to cross the busy street. Lo and behold, it wasn't the time to go, and they got hit.
I think this is a really important issue that we need to get heads together on so that we do arrive at a position so we can put our muscle as an organization behind it and go after, just like we did with because look how long it took the pedestrian safety enhancement stuff to get done. I recall a resolution that was written in 2003, and here we are in 2020, and I still hear the Prius coming down the street are the older ones. They don't make the noise when the car slows down, and yet the requirement is already there. So if, when we're unified on this, it takes this long, if we're ambivalent about this audible traffic signal stuff, that's going to make it happen a lot further on than probably needs to be, and I am very much concerned about that.
I agree too. The NFB needs to have some kind of a task force to look at. There's just so many questions to answer.
We have Debbie.
Yes. Are you hearing me?
Yep.
Ah,
Okay.
hi,
Not
Debbie.
Debbie?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Not
You
Debbie.
sounded glorious tonight.
I can't fix it, honey. My iPhone has gone off speaker here, so Debbie can only hear what I'm saying, and I'll work on getting the speaker back in a minute. I'm sure that I was in the audience when we voted for the 82, the 92, and the 02 resolutions. But I got to tell you that I've been kind of uncomfortable with the positions that we've held. I'm uncomfortable with some of our organizational positions in the way that I'm uncomfortable with an old person who says, I learned how I felt about that a long time ago and I haven't bothered to reevaluate it. We had a situation here in Columbia, Missouri, where the city was proposing to put in 3 or 4 different traffic audible pedestrian signals. And some of our group said, we're opposed to that. That's ridiculous. We've got a policy. And others of us said, no, it's more of a nuanced policy. And what we decided to do was we decided to take 2 cane travelers and 2 dog travelers, and we went to all of these proposed places, and we tried crossing the streets with the signaling, with just the traffic patterns as we heard them. And we had a sighted person who acted as our driver and our watcher, and he took notes. And at the end of the half-day work, he said, well, I have 2 things to tell you. One is that I don't think at any point any of you were in danger, but mostly you guys crossed at the wrong time, which means that you did not understand the signaling that was going on for sighted people. And these are complicated intersections. These are intersections where different lanes go at different times. I think that our initial position was one that kind of said, if you're going to do signals anyway, we're not at the table. And I think that for many federationists, we kind of said, we know what our position is. You're either a good traveler or a bad traveler. And I think that we really do need to update our policy based on the significant change in traffic patterns that we're now seeing and the complexity of pedestrian travel.
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to agree with you, Gary, and I do think that this is a good time to consider all this, because at some point these regulations will reemerge, and we need to be very thoughtful about what we support or don't support.
Right. Well, Worley, I think it's not just a time to be thoughtful so that we can be responsive. I really think it's time for the National Federation of the Blind to take the lead on designing the way we want to be able to cross intersections safely over the next decade plus. You know, because we now have the Pedestrian Safety Enhancement Act. We will see what this will in implication. What will this mean in application? But the fact is, the older I get, and it's not just about age, it is the fact that pedestrian tragedies have increased in Colorado Springs over the last decade with the growth of the city and with varying traffic patterns that they've now instituted that you guys have discussed. You know, that there's an amazing increase in traffic mishaps and fatalities. National Federation of the Blind needs to not be at the table. As always, we need to have this this task force or whatever we want to call it, and we need to design it. We need to help with designing the technology. We need to make sure it's exactly the way we want it.
Yep.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Phone number 1285.
1285.
Hi there. This is Doug Hall in Daytona Beach, Florida. My wife and I serve on our TPO, or Transportation Planning Organization, in our county. We have about 40 APSs in our area. And by the way, APS is Accessible Pedestrian Signal. A couple of things I want to mention. First of all, you mentioned about the history of the APSs. We actually go back to the 40s with ours. The rehabilitation center here was put in by the Lions, and shortly after that, some do-gooders put in APSs for those blind people, and the APSs were fire bells, which were terrible. You could not hear yourself think with those stupid things going.
Oh, yeah.
So, but we did, and they've been changed. Like I said, we have now 40 here. Our planners, we serve on our committees. And by the way, I'll make a comment about at the table. Philosophy that we've always had is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I'd rather be at the table.
At the table. Yep.
Here,
I want
here.
to mention a couple of things. Let me look at my notes. The more I listen, the more questions I came up with.
So we only have time. I'm sorry. I'm going to just interrupt you really quickly and tell you that we have a lot of people who want to get in with comments and questions. So we have time for one.
Well, okay, let me mention this quickly. We have visually impaired mobility instructors at the center. They do not like APSs in general because most of the students the center have are from all over where there are not APSs, and they insist on teaching people how to use environmental clues to cross streets safely. So in actuality, they'd rather see a combination of both APSs on intersections and no APSs so that the students learn the correct way to cross. And I think it's very important to consider that.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for your
and I appreciate, Doug, also your clarification that it is, in fact, accessible pedestrian signals in the PRO Act proposed guidelines. And we used to say audible traffic signals, and we've used so many different terms over the years, but you did get the correct one.
Morning, David. Yeah.
Hey, so as a cane travel instructor, I wanted to say that there are certain intersections like Lincoln, 6th, and Spear that I would be pretty sad if there became audible pedestrian signals there, just because it's a great teaching intersection. There's a few other ones around town, like Colfax and Franklin and Park, that have gotten audible pedestrian signals in recent years. And I've always been a little bit sad because we can't use them to teach people how to problem solve their way through such complex intersections. So from a training side of things, it becomes difficult. And then I did have a question as far as in the future, when things are becoming more and more, smart technology, things that are connected to your phone or whatnot, is there anything in the future with intersections that you guys know of that relates to things like smartphones that they're looking at or other technology?
I'm not aware that anybody's thinking about doing that with smartphones. And even though I am reputed to be a person who is really knowledgeable about technology and all that, I would tend to want to resist that until we get saturation of the smart technology competently used by a larger chunk of the population. Because if my ability to cross a street, and I say the word my to include the group, not just me personally, depends on my ability to use smart technology, what happens to those people who don't have it or can't use it for whatever reason? I think we have to be careful about how that's going to be designed, but certainly the basic principle is we, the National Federation of the Blind, need to be a part of that effort at the beginning and not reacting to something that we didn't have any control over afterward.
All right. Oh, sorry. Maureen had one. There you go. Maureen? Or David again?
No, I didn't have anything else.
Okay. All right. We've got Liam.
Hi. I'm from St. Louis.
What?
I just had a really brief story on the audible signal at my corner that just got put in, and then it was turned quieter. Long story short, I think like some nearby residents had called and complained, and I had actually enjoyed using it as like the homing beacon, like you said, to for where I was crossing to using that idle. And my O&M instructor helped me call the engineers, and they came out to turn it back up. And what they ended up doing was a compromise with curfew hours. So 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. it's at the louder preferred volume, and then 7 p.m. it turns back quieter, pretty much the quietest it can go. And so that's what they tried to do a compromise.
That, Liam, that's a great resolution. These some of these systems are pretty sophisticated. David earlier was talking about they can update them with Bluetooth. they can set it so that it responds to the overall decibel levels, I guess, around it, and gets quieter when it gets quieter and louder when it gets louder. So they're pretty sophisticated, but I'm glad they worked that out for you.
Well, and that's when I said earlier that I wanted to make sure that we were involved in all technological exploration, everything. That's what I meant. There's
All right.
all
We have somebody else, Kevin?
ways. Who else do we
My
have?
turn now?
Latoya, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure of the system yet.
What's that, Latoya? I didn't hear.
For an example, I live in New Jersey, and there is the roads. Like, for example, what if a car passed the red light? How are you gonna know? If that's another reason why I say that they are very good. Another thing is when they're doing there's there's 3 ways the cars travels. They either drive left, right, or around, because they're going into whatever is form of interception, so to speak. And I also feel that since there are more ways than just the basic knowledge of driving straight, back or forth, left or right, they can go even diagonally also, people do on certain highways and so forth. I think that we should fix the timing of the APS, or have something for that aspect too, because they're basically for the ones that are going left to right, but the light is turning red or green, because they still don't have the technology yet to inform the visual impaired, blind, or just general sighted person that like elder citizen or so forth, when they are going to turn, when they do the diagonal turning. Right. You understand what I'm saying?
So yes, but let me point out one really, really important thing about traffic lights in general, whether they're visual or audible. I don't care what cue you're getting that tells you when the walk signal is on, if you get it audibly or you get it visually. Everybody knows that is not, just because you heard the walk signal is on, or just because you saw the walk signal sign come on, whether, when you're sighted, that doesn't mean that it's safe to cross.
That's right.
I think people have to remember this. You still have to listen and look both ways, because, as you said, there are cars who break the red light. There's traffic patterns. And so, anybody who's teaching travel is going to tell you, you have to be situationally aware. You got to pay attention to what's going on around you and recognize that you're getting one cue that says, yes, the walk signal is on. That's true. But don't stick your foot out there unless you have audibly verified that nothing's about to hit you to the best of your ability. Now, I recognize that's not always possible. That's why we have pedestrians getting killed to the tune of 20, 30,000 nationally a year, something like that. But I think that's an important principle that everybody who travels, as a blind person or as a sighted person, needs to remember. The walk signal is just an indicator. It's not going to stop the crazy driver from coming around and hitting you.
It's and here in the U.S., people mostly follow the rules of the light, but a lot of countries, they don't. It doesn't matter. I was in my wife's home country, Armenia, and they literally do not pay attention to any of the lights at any intersection. And you're basically playing chicken all the time with the cars. Anyway.
My feeling is that it's a verifier, right? So I trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
Yeah, I want to hear
trust but verify. Absolutely.
I want to hear the pattern first, and then if the clicker says it's okay, then I've got 2 indicators, and then I run.
Tony.
Yeah, here we have one here at Millen Hermosa, where Tina and I live. Ours is both audible and tactile, and after 7 o'clock, the gentleman who was commenting about the sound, ours goes down. So after 10 o'clock, it goes down to a lower signal, so it doesn't disturb people, and then it goes up around, I think, about 8 or 9, because the times before the virus hit, I did go out, I could hear it. Ours does both, but you're right, Curtis and Kevin, that the way people text and drive behind the wheel, they do not pay attention, and something, there is nothing to stop that. With regards to smartphones, that would be cool if they could do it, but the technology is not there yet. So maybe a task force, that would be a very good idea, is to have a task force set up to look at traffic patterns, to see how the lights work and see what does and does not work.
I agree. And here's the thing, the bottom line, in my opinion, with regard to where we are. Where we are right now, the accessible pedestrian signals are still in the minority. Silent cars are still in the minority. That won't always be true,
right,
but that's where it is right now. So the savvy blind traveler, if you want to be able to take yourself places on your own and be in charge of where and when you go, you have to prepare for the possibility that you might go somewhere where there are signals or where there aren't signals. And depending upon what you find, you take the appropriate action to get your body and your carcass across the street in such a way that you don't die while you're trying to do it. This is the bottom line as it exists today. We don't know where these things are installed when we go to a new city. We don't know whether they are going to provide useful information or not, even if they are installed. And so the smart traveler is going to learn as a part of their training that you got to be flexible and you got to try to problem solve, right? That's the bottom line for everything. If you can solve problems about what happens when you have to cross the street, you'll be successful whether there's an accessible pedestrian signal or not. And right now, there's more nots than haves on that front.
Can I just jump in here really quick? My phone died so I had to run down here to the bunker, and I know David Neatfelt was providing some input, and I always appreciate David's, and I guess what we ought to do is give him a shameless plug because he is such a great friend and colleague. So we should check out David Neatfelt's podcast.
Yeah.
Breaking Blind Podcast. And already there are 2 episodes. They're short and they're wonderfully done. Practical tips about how to begin to be a traveler. I don't know. He could talk more about it, I think, in 20 seconds if he was close to being unmuted. Otherwise, I would just say check out the podcast platforms.
So I can ask her to play Breaking Blind Podcast because that's the name of it, because I'm going to listen.
That's the name. And I will give it an unqualified endorsement. The podcast is great.
Yeah, so it's the Breaking Blind podcast. It's currently up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's going to take a little while before I can get it on things like Alexa, I think, but I'm not an expert on that field either.
Alexa pulls it from Apple Podcasts anyway, so it's already
there.
Okay.
Yeah, you're there.
Okay.
I did not look and see if it was on. I just forgot the damn thing. Anyway, one of them. I'll check.
Yeah, you let me know.
All right.
And right now it is basic cane travel. We are going to get into some more advanced stuff in the future to try to cover everybody's bases, so it can even be a review for people that are experienced travelers.
And almost everything pulls from iTunes podcasts anyway, except for Google. So.
I didn't check. I know what I was going to say. I didn't check Tune In, but I bet it's going to be up there too.
We have Karis. And then
Hi. So I live over like in the Belmar area off of Wadsworth and Alameda, and one thing that I noticed from pure chance is that I was actually standing at the intersection one day waiting to cross, and an emergency vehicle was coming towards me. So I'd been listening to it for about 20 seconds. So obviously I wasn't about to, try and cross the intersection when an emergency vehicle was coming. And all of a sudden they have the voice that says it's that you're crossing whichever street you're about to cross. And so it was beeping, and which indicated that you were supposed to wait. And then all of a sudden it started screaming at me that there was an emergency vehicle approaching. And I was really, really confused by that, and it scared the bejeebers out of me. I almost fell over because it was so loud. But I was really confused on what is the logic behind that. I mean, I could hear the emergency vehicle approaching 20 seconds before that ever went off.
Right.
And so I really didn't understand why they would do that when we could already hear them. And is there a way to can we petition, or can I petition to them to try and get them to make that go away? Because it to me, it doesn't make any sense, and it just scared me, and it just seems redundant.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be careful that it doesn't scare you, so you jump in front of a vehicle.
Stop in the middle of traffic.
Yeah. That's a great question. I have no idea why they do it. And that's the intersection that was recently on TV news in Denver. People complaining that accessible part of that thing didn't work well enough. The light wasn't long. The pedestrian light wasn't long enough to get across, and so on. So they wanted some other solution. I don't know much about that intersection myself, but yeah. Call the city and talk to them.
Yep. All right. Sheila Leegland.
Hi there.
Montana.
Hey.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Yeah.
Okay. I have hearing aids in both ears. And when I first got them, people said I should never go anywhere by myself. And that was like unacceptable. And so I did it anyway. But whatever method you have with Audible Signals needs to at least consider whether deafblind people can even hear those, because everything depends on my frequency range.
Yeah.
As to whether I can hear those signals properly. And when I first got my hearing aids, it was really scary crossing streets because everything was so loud. And my brain had to get used to hearing more or less normally again with hearing aids.
Wow.
Right.
But when you have deafblind people, you've got to be sure that those frequency ranges are varied enough if you're going to use them, that if they can't hear the traffic, they can hear the audible thing. But the best thing would be to be sure that people who are deafblind have the best mobility possible, the best training possible, so that they can use whatever it is they need to use, even if they have to use signs that say things like, I need help crossing a street.
That's why I favor the vibrotactile buttons, right?
That's exactly right, Curtis.
The buttons that vibrate are perfect for that, because once you feel it vibrate, you know, we don't want to ever take that feature away from the accessible pedestrian signals that behave the way they should. And that's a point which I hope whatever group gets together to figure this out will make sure that stays on the list.
And Sheila, thank you for bringing that point. And you need to be a big part, and you are a big part of this conversation. I'm sure that's the kind of thing, for example, Gary Wonder would like to spotlight in the monitor. I mean, I'm glad your voice is at this table.
Yay, Montana.
Marianne.
I was actually going to say I'm glad that the vibrating thing is part of the signals, but I would not want that to ever be the only thing, because frankly, even if I do push a button, I want to make sure I get to the place to cross. And usually by the time you push a button and it's time to start crossing, you don't want to fool around again with having to figure out where to line up. But I do have a funny story, which is one of the main reasons why I oppose pedestrian signals. And Jessica can feel my pain. I was in Nashville at Blast, and I remember there's one street, and it might have been Broadway. And at the time they had pedestrian signals on every corner on Broadway, I think it was. I noticed they don't anymore. But they were easy four-way intersections and everything. And I remember walking a block over from Broadway to get to something that was on the next street over. And I had these people come running up to me, and they're like, hey, you need to be over on that other street, because that's where we got all those big chirpy things just for you. You shouldn't walk here. This isn't safe for you. Only over there. And I said, but I don't need something over there. I need something over here. And yes, I can cross the street safely. And that's when I said, damn it, I hate pedestrian signals. Now, task force, yes, absolutely. After studying traffic patterns up here in Boulder, yes, there are definitely times when those seconds really, really do matter. Those advanced seconds for pedestrians truly matter. And there's just too many variables now, and a traffic pattern at one time of the day is not the same as it is 10 minutes later sometimes, based on what.
Yeah.
So Marianne, I never did have anybody tell me I shouldn't be in a place to cross a road. However, one funny story about Tennessee is our state bird is the mockingbird. And when we
Is the what bird? You cut out, Jess.
It's the mockingbird.
Oh, how
And
appropriate.
so when we first were getting pedestrian signals, we were having a lot of chirp signals, and the mockingbirds were going around and they were mocking the chirp signals,
yeah.
and so we had to get rid of them
Yeah.
because they were giving
Yeah.
misinformation.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading about that actually somewhere, and it just cracked me up that they actually picked a bird for the noise, and the bird was indigenous to that area. By the way, Marianne, what happens at Blast stays at Blast, okay? Just so
Phone number 4027.
This is Nancy Burgess Hall in Daytona Beach, Florida. Two things. Number one, the standard, my understanding is the standard in Florida for new APSs are the vibrotactile that announce that it is safe to cross a particular direction. For instance, cross 4th Avenue. And it will keep repeating until the walk light turns off. Also in Daytona Beach, they have lengthened the time, which makes it better. But one of the things I noticed as a sighted person using a wheelchair is that there were times that if I was distracted, I would miss the walk light. So the Audible caught my attention so that I could cross relatively safely, depending on cars. But, you know, that's something that even without them, for those people that don't care for APSs, when you have people that have the green light straight ahead, and all they see that, they'd make a right turn without looking. They make a right turn without looking. That's worse. My experience is that's worse than making a right on red.
Yeah.
I agree. And look, let me also say something about pole placement, because while we're talking about all this stuff, let's not forget that some cities do a very miserable job of placing these signal poles so that you have to walk 10 feet away from the corner to get to the button to push it. And you might have a pole on 10 feet down one street and a pole 10 feet down the other street. And so now you've just wasted valuable time going back and forth. And so there's a lot to think about in terms of the ideal design for all of this. Because cities, you know, in Albuquerque, for example, it was very routine that you had to walk 10 feet away to get to the signal actuation button. And this was the button for everybody, not just for people who are blind. So if we're going to have this stuff out there, it seems to me an important parameter has got to be the placement of the buttons and the placement of the poles so that they don't cause you to have to wander way off from where you're supposed to cross just to be able to activate the button. A myriad of complex issues, as I said before.
Florida, I hope you're involved. I don't know your name, but I hope you're involved in a chapter down there, National Federation of the Blind of Florida, and welcome to our Mountain Time at 5 calls. We love it when folks visit us from all over the country.
Are we like out of time? We got more questions or what?
Peter.
Peter Cyrus.
We already left the time.
Last call.
Holly Ryan. Holly.
Hi, this is Holly. You've heard it before from Daytona Beach. I'm a certified orientation mobility specialist at the Rehab Center. I have gotten in with the Florida Department of Transportation and been they've used me many times for different suggestions on where to put the pedestrian signals in, how to do it, what sounds work best for our community. Being active in as many boards as you can be in, having as much say in what's going on is really important. The reason the signage is where it is, at least in Florida, and they use PROAG, and their standards are a bit more stringent than PROAG is for Florida Department of Transportation. But the signs are supposed to line up with the back of the crosswalk, so you should be able to push the button, put it next to your body, and be able to walk straight to the crosswalk. There shouldn't be any of having to go hunt down a sign. There shouldn't be any having to, get disoriented as you're walking from the push button to the crossing, or at least that's the way it is here. With our new systems, we have been very active with I've gotten the other centers, the Conklin Center, which is a multiple disability center that includes blindness, sponsored by the Lions. I've gotten their mobility instructors involved with anything we've done, so that way we have a multitude of input put into the system. But I actually do a lot of training for the FDOT employees on blindness and how to deal with people who are blind and visually impaired. It's surprising as to how many people are afraid to even make contact with us. So it's been 4 years now since I started working directly with Florida Department of Education or Florida Department of Transportation, and it's been quite rewarding. The reason the machine yelled at you when you were trying to cross the street and the ambulance came or the fire truck is because of the fact they can't put that in tactily. So for those who are hard of hearing, need to be able to hear it as well. So it gets really loud, so that way you don't step off the curb thinking that it's an audible signal.
I think you would hear the siren of the emergency.
Yeah.
vehicle.
Well,
So, go ahead,
and
Dan.
one of the things for me is the louder this whatever is next to me. Like I remember using an intersection where we'd actually ask them to turn it off after checking it out, but it was so loud. It's like, man, whatever it was, and I literally almost did jump off the curb, even though what I needed to do was verify, that the fact there wasn't going to be somebody turning right and running over me. And there are other things that while we're on it, I'll let somebody else ask. I really want to say that I don't like the sound that Curtis played. That sounds to me like automatic weapons fire.
I hate that.
That is really
That's not good.
It's inappropriate. But I'm told we have one like that in South Glen Mall, just about a mile from where we live here in Centennial. So, I mean, who the heck thought that was a good
May I say that this was a sound that was highly endorsed by a cited certified orientation and mobility specialist in
Yeah.
Hawaii. So I'm with you, Dan, and I'm sorry to say that it was this certified person that got us those rapid machine gun things at that intersection.
Well, so here's the thing. Anything that startles me while I'm at the corner is not going to be safe. That's all.
All right, we got a last question here with Cody.
So it's actually Jody. I stole
what I-
Cody's phone. So
Jody and Cody.
Jody.
So
Joko, that's so sweet.
when I first went blind and started traveling with a guide dog, it was obviously way more different than with a cane. And so I really started exploring my surroundings. I was living in Carbondale, Illinois, which is a big university town. And I started noticing all these problems as I was walking. So I actually did some research, found out if the intersection I wanted changed was actually state or city owned. Found out it was city owned, went to the public works director and kind of started this own little initiative to start fixing things around town. And so I was like, I know it's a long shot, but let's try and do one of these audio crosswalks and make it surround not just blindness, but other disabilities as well. And so they put in the APS and everything was really great. I was so excited. And he goes, go down there and test it out for me. And I said, okay, sure. So me and Nika go down, we test it out. And it's also tactile, so there's Braille. And I start reading the Braille and they put the signs up wrong. So both signs would say Grand Avenue, Grand Avenue. And I was like, okay, I'm going to cross over, check those other two signs, Wall Street, Wall Street. So at that point, I realized all four corners had been duplicated and they had it messed up. So I call and I say, hey, you guys, this is what happened. It's all great, but you guys put the Braille up wrong. And he goes, oh, this is what happens when sighted people do things. He goes, we ended up just looking at the arrows on the signs and we didn't look at the Braille. So after that was switched,
you know, it was really great. It really helped a lot of people out. But the one downfall is it's a countdown system. So to tell you how many seconds you have to cross, and that along with those noises, it's very anxiety driven. So all in all, it was a really great project I got to help out with. And I really think that, like a lot of you have said tonight, we do need to readdress this within the NFB. So thank you guys for doing this presentation tonight.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have, guys.
Thank you guys so much.
You guys have anything else? Scott?
It's been real. It's been great.
Trust and verify.
Trust
Let us
and
get
verify,
those
y'all.
APSs through the gate.
Y'all join us Monday, and we've got a great guest. You're gonna love meeting Mr. Scott White. Man, the dude knows a lot of stuff. So be with us Monday, or My Blindness Monday. Right now, I gotta deal with the fact that I was on Workout Wednesday, and it's Friday, and my legs still hurt really bad, really bad, really bad, you guys, really bad. Have a great weekend, y'all. Go to your chapter meetings online. Anything else, Jess?
All right.
We're done.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Night.